Good morning, Vietnam. Good evening, America. And welcome to the Viet Challenge webinar series, How to Survive and Thrive in Crisis, Lesson for Startups. The event is proudly hosted by Viet Challenge, the pioneering global startup competition for Vietnamese young ventures, a leading startup investment and equity crowdfunding platform of Southeast Asia, and the Hanoi Youth Union. I'm Henry Tran, Deputy Secretary of the Hanoi Youth Union, venture partner of VinaCapital Ventures, and your host for today's webinar. This morning, we look at the impacts of COVID-19 on the economy, and particularly the startup ecosystem in the East and the West, and also challenges and opportunities for startups to navigate through this uncertain time. To tackle these tough questions, we have the best experts joining us today from the academia, startup, ecosystem builders, and VCs. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Andy Wu, Assistant Professor of Business Administration in the Strategy Unit of the Harvard Business School. Ms. Malavika Tiwari, co-founder and CEO of Invalids, a leading manufacturer of home mobility aids and equipment for people with different kinds of disabilities. Mr. Bobby Liu, ecosystem builder, founding partner at Topica Founder Institute, one of the most successful accelerators programs in Vietnam, as well as across Southeast Asia. And last but not least, Mr. Bung Chun, President at AI Education and Vice President at Saigon Innovation Hub. So let's start by meeting our speakers, and they will introduce themselves in a short introduction. Please, Mr. Andy.
Hi guys, my name is Andy Wu. I'm an assistant professor of business administration in the strategy unit at Harvard Business School. I conduct research, teach, and practice in the area of strategy for technology entrepreneurship. I primarily focus my research on the United States. I also conduct research on globally in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South Asia as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bobby.
Hey, hi everyone. Good evening, and good morning to everyone. So my name is Bobby Liu. I'm the executive director of TFI Ventures, which run the Founder Institute program in Vietnam and Thailand. At the same time, I'm also the senior director of Topica EdTech Group, where mainly I'm in charge of strategy and investment for Topica. Other times, basically, I help out with a lot of advisory and mentorship work with startups around the region.
Thank you. Malavika?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Malavika Tiwari, and I am a CEO and co-founder of an organization called Invalids. We are a leading manufacturer of vehicles for the physically challenged people and other equipments for their aid in India. And we are currently going to expand all over the world. And I also work in the IT field industry as a technical architect in Cognizant as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Bung.
Hello, good morning. My name is Bung Chun. I work as AI Education. It stands for Asia Innovative Education. We are an EdTech platform. We aiming to do the blended education for future skill for high school students in Vietnam. And at the same time, I work at Saigon Innovation Hub in the advisory board. Saigon Innovation Hub is a government-backed agency. We are not like ecosystem builder, but we call ourselves ecosystem activator. We try to work with the whole ecosystem, especially in university, to help the commercialization process and spin out from university to startups. And we also want to bring the Vietnamese startup to go to the world.
Thank you, speakers. So to the audience today, we have representatives from the academia, startups, VCs, and ecosystem builders. These are the people that are most qualified to discuss the content of today's webinar. And again, we'll go through the following topics. First, challenges and opportunities for startups in times of crisis. Second, how startups and investors are navigating through this uncertain time. And third, impacts of COVID-19 on startups in emerging economies. So again, this is meant to be an interactive format in which guest speakers and the audience can interact and discuss different points of view. Viewer can also comment their questions directly into YouTube channel or Hanoi Youth Union and Via Challenge fan pages. In the last 15 minutes or so, after we've covered topics, we will go through all your questions if possible. So now let's go ahead and answer our questions. The first one will go to Professor Wu and Bobby. To start with, what's going on? Could you please walk us through what is going on with the economy right now and in your world of business and through how it has manifested in the entrepreneurial community that you are involved with?
So let me start from the view at 10,000 feet. What we are seeing right now is an unprecedented situation for the in the modern entrepreneurial community. And let me break this down on the demand side and the supply side. On the demand side, like any sort of normal recession, your customers are buying less, but even more dramatically than that, in many businesses, your customers aren't buying at all. On the supply side, this is unique in that we're seeing major disruptions to the supply chain feeding into companies in all kinds of industries. And in many cases, companies themselves are prevented from being able to operate in order to comply with local public health regulations. And those things together lead us to a very terrible situation where in a normal recession, you might see a company lose 20, 30, 40% of its revenue top line through the recession. What we're seeing is for many companies really going from 100% to 0% in revenue, where your fixed cost structure is still existing and ongoing. And that is a challenge that, I is unprecedented and is a horrific situation for many, many entrepreneurs. And we're going to talk through today about how exactly one can deal with that situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, there was a survey conducted between February 28th to March 9th, and almost 78% of the respondents, they said that this outbreak is likely to have a financial impact on the business, and it has definitely impacted their businesses. Almost more than 50% of the manufacturers, they expected that their operations would go on a literal standstill in coming months, and more than 35% said that they're already facing that supply chain and demand disruptions. So especially with the manufacturing and production industry as mine, we are at an abrupt halt, and we don't know when the production would actually start for us.
Yeah, how about Bobby? What's your view on this?
Well, I think this whole crisis is taking an impact rather suddenly for everyone. It's not something that we kind of foresaw coming. Even though different countries got impacted at different periods, but they are really close to each other, and I think the suddenness in terms of the shutdown by countries involved, which to date is over 200 countries. I think that's taking a toll on businesses rather than what you would normally expect from, let's say, an economic downturn. Well, I think for the most part, it really clearly showed up certain industries, the strength of it and the weaknesses, of the different sectors. But I'm quite sure if this thing, if this crisis were to recover, let's say within the next 1 month or so, whereby at least some basic businesses can be open. Then I think, and then 6 months after that, I think things will more or less, be able to move back to so-called normal. But if this crisis were to prolong for another 3-4 months, especially when we are seeing different countries getting second wave of infections, then yes, then that's going to be a systemic impact on businesses.
Yeah, thank you for your views. I think they're all correct in the sense that we haven't foreseen any sign of COVID-19 before 2020, and but now just a few months into the new year, IMF already forecasted a negative 3% of global recession this year. Is unprecedented since I think 100 years or so. And this has a huge impacts on the economies and businesses around the world. I pretty much agree with all of you. And then can we talk a little bit more about the sectors or verticals that are impacted by this pandemic? Because it doesn't seem like it will have like an equal impact on all industries, right? Some will take a more serious hit, like tourism and hospitality. Some may have new opportunities. So what's your view on that? Maybe
I
Andy.
feel like,
Yeah.
okay. So I feel like the airline and especially the restaurants, the airline industry is the highly impacted. Like there are industries which impact much harder than the others, like the airlines, restaurants, then the live event companies, movie theaters probably, and as you said, the tourism. These are more affected. But we cannot just say that just they are experiencing more than others. Each industry is experiencing its own unique set of challenges, and which is threatening to their once thriving businesses, especially the unemployment rate. Like for small businesses, keeping those paychecks running is a big struggle, because you cannot. Unemployment rate has gone so up from past few months, and it's going to get more even worse situation in the months going forward. So keeping those paychecks running, not to fire people, is what is the biggest struggle of any business or any industries, is what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we all in this together. So drop down from the 10,000 feet point of view. Andy, can you provide us with more detailed analysis of the situation?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that we're in for the entrepreneurial perspective is that, of course, a huge amount of entrepreneurs are in the service industries. And, that ranges from, on one end, restaurants to the other end, digital services, right? And the issue with that is that the physical services, which accompany many of what we think of as small businesses, anything from a barbershop to a restaurant, obviously they cannot conduct their business, and they're hitting 100 to 0%, revenue, right? And that's a very dramatic effect. Now, I want to focus on the other end here, which is the technology, digital entrepreneurs. And the challenge, and this is generic across the board, but the challenge specifically is what we ex ante told these entrepreneurs to do. The goal of being a technology entrepreneur is to raise venture capital financing ex ante in order to make a big fixed cost investment, which, as we teach strategy at Harvard Business School, fixed cost scale is what leads to competitive advantage. Now, this is a situation where when times are good, scale is great. When times are bad, scale is the worst possible thing you can have. So you have a lot of startups that are sitting on large fixed cost investments in technology and in headcount that they can't easily get rid of. Now, that's specifically on the supply side. I think on the demand side, there's unique opportunities that are being presented by this environment. And I would say the two categories that I'm looking out for the most are, one is services that facilitate remote work. And so you could think about services like Slack and services like Zoom. I've been writing a case about Zoom and the success they've had recently. In December of 2019, they had 10 million users. Today, they have somewhere in the ballpark of 200 million users, right? So you can think about the opportunity that presents. The other category of, besides remote work facilitating services that I'm excited about, is the what I would describe as direct-to-consumer services, and that includes things like media streaming, like Netflix or HBO or whatever, media streaming, as well as things that deliver food to consumers directly to their homes. And for these kinds of businesses that are, I would say, loosely benefiting from the crisis, it's not that the current increase in demand is the meaningful part. The part that is exciting is that there's a lot of ex-ante inertia that these entrepreneurs have in terms of their customers just are used to going to the supermarket. They're not used to ordering food at home. This is going to be a massive shift in the behavior of customers that everyone is betting on is going to linger post the recession.
Yeah, so a lot of people have been talking about how things will change forever in terms of customer behavior, and that has a lot to do with the pandemic and the current situation. So Bobby and Boom, could you please shed some light on this? What does it mean for startup who calling for investment? What should they pay attention to? What are the differences in the current situation?
I read an joke in the Facebook. They asked the question, who lead the digital transformation process in your company? So the answer is not the CEO, it's not the CTO, it's not the CMO. The one who win is the CEO VID, COVID. We call it in Vietnam. Then suddenly everything is go digital, go online. Especially for education online, like me and Bobby, we are doing. So we have the huge opportunity, the awareness, the behaviors is changing, and so we save a lot of time and money to educate the market about the learning, online learning, blended learning. So it's a huge opportunity for us. But the point is we can catch us not is another one. Henry, did you remember last time we discussed on Facebook about the ideas of startup right now? Have to forget the term of unicorn startup, but we can focus on crotchet startups. And you showed okay, we can do the camel startups.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. What do you think, Bobby, about raising fund in this environment?
Okay, so I had a podcast, I think beginning of April, and that would have been about, let's say, 2 weeks into probably the most severe period in Southeast Asia for the spread. So I just want to illustrate the change right within 2 weeks. So at the beginning of April, when I did a podcast with a few investors, so all of them said that probably investment flow will come in from things that they've already done prior to this outbreak. And therefore this period of time will be a bit difficult simply because, for the due deal process, they have to be in person in country. And then in Southeast Asia, we are looking at 6-7 different countries, and they're all very different. Moving that forward, and only as recent as maybe last week, when I had some chats with other VCs, looks like they are realigning the way they do DD to the point whereby they will still need to deploy funds in this market, right? So like I said earlier, we don't know whether it's going to be 1 month or 6 months, and they cannot just be sitting down on their asses and not do anything just because they cannot travel. So they have to reinvent ways to do duty so that they are still be able to deploy, funds that they have raised. And then only about a week or so ago, one of the funds out of Singapore called KK Fund has initiated this movement called Meet Your Match. And to date, I think there are more than 600 startups participating, to more than 150 investors that will try to do some kind of a matching. It'll be interesting. I mean, I can't tell you the results right now, obviously, because it's just got started. But I believe that probably in, let's say, a month or two, that's where we're going to see some real action online, and hopefully some of these startups, get funding despite this difficult period.
Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive, but I think the Meet Your Match is a really interesting case, and we'll come back later to elaborate more on, especially how it interact with certain new platforms like Genre. But then again, back to the topics. So we kind of know what we are in now, but in terms of challenges and opportunities for startups and investors, my next question will be for Dr. Wu. Which is, in examples of times of crisis that happened in the past, for example, the 2008 financial crisis, what's the lesson there, and how startups can navigate through such times, and can they apply it for this pandemic?
So let me speak separately about existing startups and then talk about what are the opportunities for new startups. So in the realm of existing startups, I think this is, I'll frame it positively. This is an opportunity to get your financial house in order and to limit some of the excess that we've seen in the last 5 years. In both the original .com boom, the crisis of the 2000s, and hopefully today, The lead up to that is an economic boom and a surplus of venture capital that I think leads to some unnecessary spending. As an example, I'll give the particular chair I'm sitting on right now is the Herman Miller Aeron chair. I use this as a rule of thumb. When I walk into a startup office and I see that they bought this chair for all their employees, that is a startup that is wasting money. This chair is the symbol of the .com boom excess, right? And we've seen a lot of particularly sovereign wealth funds deluge startups with capital that they're spending on things that they probably don't need to spend money on. This will be a chance to pull back on that. The opportunity, especially for ongoing startups in today's environment, is the fact that I think no one holds any entrepreneur accountable for not having planned for the present crisis. Unlike past crises where you, in theory, should have had some planning here, I don't think any entrepreneur it's really anyone's fault. Now, the upside of that is it gives you a lot of leeway with your financiers as well as your, let's say, your suppliers who you owe accounts deliverable to. What I mean by that is that I think that the VCs that I've spoken to are particularly generous with bridge rounds nowadays, as in there's a lot less due diligence going into the bridge round than there normally would be, where you'd hold the entrepreneur accountable for having to need the bridge round. Now you need the VCs know you got to come out there and bail out your startups. Similarly with local banks, if you have debt financing on your startup, I find that local banks are very accommodating nowadays of working with the entrepreneurs to get them the financing they need, because again, they know that this entrepreneur is a good client to have. We want to maintain the relationship. It's not their fault. Let's do what we can. That's the existing entrepreneurs. Let's talk about the new entrepreneurs. I will say that relative to the last few economic crises we've seen, there's definitely a pattern of a lot of great startups coming out of recessions. There's a lot about that kind of cyclical environment that creates a window for entrepreneurs to enter. I think we're very much in that window today. Now, the challenge for the entrepreneurs watching us right now, the new ones that are watching us right now, is deciding exactly when you're going to make your move to enter. And from this point, I have no actual answer for you. Let's say you enter today, and then the recession and the crisis goes on. Then you're just burning fixed costs for several months without actually any opportunity to go to market. And so there is a bit of a timing game here about how to time the bottom of the recession. Besides that, though, I do guarantee you that in the next 18 months, we will be in a situation much like we've seen after the financial crisis of 2008, after the dot-com boom, where it will be a really glorious time for entrepreneurship. But I can't exactly tell you when that's going to be in the next 18 months. And I apologize to our viewers for not having more insight on that.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question that nobody is able to answer. But the best thing is to have our financials right? This is an opportunity to have that, to make it happen. And then bridge rounds for VCs and to work with local banks on, lending for startups. Also window for opportunities for, new ventures to be built. So maybe a little bit more on that. What do you think about this as an actual, entrepreneur? Malavika, can you shed some light on this?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add on what Andy just said. Like the 2008 financial crisis, it actually had a lot of economic upheaval and political, ramifications happened. But what it brought out most was innovation. At this time, like during these crises, we have observed that most of the people, like the bright young people who have a lot of who previously would have gone to any banking or a corporate job, they are now considering more options just because there is lack of jobs everywhere and unemployment is increasing. So what we observed, as Andy also mentioned, that especially in the UK, it was observed that after 2008, there were a record of more than 600,000 new businesses started up up to 2015. So what I feel is that during this time, it's kind of a reality check for startups that are we prepared for this? Were we always prepared for this challenge? And were our vision, our ideas going to be the same when it all comes down? So currently, as an entrepreneur, we are in the same situation. It's becoming very hard to keep the paychecks running. And so what we are doing during this time is that we are changing our operations. We are brainstorming. We are creating new ideas. We are creating a new product designs, and we are also coming up with a much better plan so that we are able to handle if this type of situation happens in future. And almost everyone is predicting that this COVID might come back again in the winters, probably by December, but who knows. So that's what is the main challenge. What I feel is like, you have to be focused on what your vision is and become more digital is the need of the hour, becoming just digital. And one more thing I would like to add is, like, we have to make small changes in our day-to-day operations. Like, if it's a small business, all the employees should be cross-trained, so that in this kind of situation, and you have limited resources, anyone can pick up what is happening in the other department, and there is no loss of business is running as usual. And there comes a time when even the owners and the managers, they all have to get their hands dirty in the mud. So that's what I would like to say in this crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Malavika. We'll come back to your, deeper into your operation later. I'm really interested in the details. But in the meantime, can you talk a little bit more about your observations or comments about the current economic outlook and market around the region? For example, in India, how does it look like? How does it impact your particular stuff?
Yeah, so my business specially deals with the manufacturing and production. So it has completely come to an abrupt halt. So we technically cater to a wide variety of people, and most of them belong to the middle class society. And currently, the people are reluctant to buy a new vehicle, which is like a luxury during this economic crisis, and they don't come under essentials in India. So what we have done is, like, we have asked our sales and marketing team to work from home, but manufacturing is at a complete standstill. So what we are also observing, that the global GDP would also, could be around, could be a big loss to the global GDP, and the pandemic crisis could cross more than $9 trillion, more than economies of even Japan and Germany. This was actually told by the Indian International Monetary Fund. So most of the people, especially in India, we have observed that most of the people have lost their jobs, especially the daily wages, who were working on a different in a different state or a city. They have lost their jobs, and they are traveling back to their hometown, and we don't know how this unemployment is going to last for how long, and how they are going to come back to their jobs. And especially in the business side point of view, most of the people who are into food businesses are not able to get the local groceries on time. And even the all the hotel business, the restaurant business, the obviously the tourism, everything is at a complete standstill. I think the most people who are getting most benefit out of these are the digital companies, like your home deliveries. That online shopping has become a big boost, especially in India.
Thank you. And Bung, what do you think about this topic?
I think this uncertain time bring a lot of opportunity. Like one of my VC friend, he texts me right away when the pandemic is turned up. He said, "Okay, this is shopping time. Give me the list to fulfill two questions. The first is what is the startup can show how they deal with the struggle, and secondly, how they show that their startup is the meaningful innovation. That means they can survive without anything, without any support from the VC. So this is like shopping time, and it's quite good to prove like you are a very strong team, and with the lean model for startup, you can easily flexibility to pivot to fix with the situation. I think some VC look at this time as a very good opportunity for investment in startup.
Do you agree, Bobby? We have lots of questions about this topic from the audience about the investment landscape, and they're asking for advice for startups to raise fund in this time.
Well, I think the knee-jerk reaction would be that it's a buyer's market, as what Bong has said. But I think through conversations with them, I think they're also a little bit wary of this, thing happening, right? Yes, we do see common questions like, should startups hibernate? Should they pivot? Should they do something else? Should they, reduce staff strength? So there are many questions that are in the minds of founders. What can they do? I think, as what Malavika pointed out earlier, that anything that has that's lending immediate value, such as maybe, let's say, delivery platform, for example, I think this will still go on a little bit. But I think at the same time, because of the deep discounts that they're giving in order to boost their businesses, in the long run, that's not going to work either. And then, of course, we look at all the online education, which all of a sudden has taken front and center attention. But what I feel is that while this is all great, and from topical standpoint, that's what we do, online education for the last 10, 12 years, we still see a shift from the near 99% or maybe 95%, I don't know, of offline students now trying to do online. And then you have a whole bunch of educators, and as good as they are, they're also, I think, struggling in trying to deliver, education online. And then there's always going to be, a learning curve, so to speak, for them to overcome. So I think critically, we got to look at it and say, how long is this going to last? Okay, if this shutdown or lockdown is going to, continue for another 6 months, then a lot of things that we're doing now will become habitual, will become the norm. But if this so-called shutdown or lockdown in different countries were to finish within the next 1 month or so, I think very soon things will go back to the old normal, right? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have been talking about how the graph of recovery will look like, and maybe it doesn't look like the V model. Maybe it's like U or maybe L. That's the worst case. So we really don't know. It really depends on the vaccine and all the measures that we actually have for the overall situation. But
the truth of the matter is nobody knows.
Yeah.
I mean, we can put our best guess forward, right? Yeah. But nobody knows. Nobody has come across such a situation. I mean, if you talk about dot-com days, back in 2000, 2001, if you talk about the financial crisis back in 2008, those you can actually sort of predict it because, it happened before. It's an economic downturn. It's so-called a man-made, event. But, and in terms of recovery and all that stuff, we sort of, are able to see that. But in this situation, we have never seen anything like this since 1918, right? And I guess none of us, was born yet, so that's good. But other than that, I think it's something that we are all grappling for answers. It's just like So it will be interesting times. The only thing I can say is that we've got to stay positive. We just got to do whatever we need to do. And throughout this period of time, probably some new things may start to evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for your sharing.
But Henry, how do you think about that? You also involved with VC and everything.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because as we know, Bobby is launching the Meet Your Match initiative in countries in the region, and somehow he managed to have like 100 funds, VC or investor to join him, and also we had a lot of attention from the startups themselves. So, in terms of investing, will the recession affect startup fundraising, especially in the Asia Pacific region? What kind of prediction do you have for investing overall? And any insight from the Meet Your Match initiative that you can share with the audience, Bobby?
Yeah. Okay. So, it's a really I call it Tinder for funding. so it's startups selecting VCs that they want to talk to, and then the VCs get to select the startups that they want to talk to. They have selected them. So in short, it's like Tinder for funding, right? So it was first launched in Thailand. Okay, so I'm not the organizer. I'm only helping them in Vietnam. But the organizer or it's KK Fund based out of Singapore. So they first launched it in Thailand. Response was good, and different countries started bugging them to do it in their countries. Like for me, I was bugging them to do in Vietnam. So 2 weeks ago, they launched it for 5 other countries. So apart from Vietnam, you have Taiwan, Malaysia, Singapore, and Korea. So yeah, and it's been going fairly successful. Lots of applicants from startups who obviously are looking for funding. And then surprisingly, there's actually strong participation by the VC community. I think we have over 150 VCs from the region participating, including those from even Korea. So I think what was really interesting was what Andy said earlier, right? That companies that have very heavy overheads, for example, fixed costs, and they are the ones that actually suffered the most, right? But those startups that actually have runway for 18 months, 24 months, I think they're still okay. I think such startups will probably get even more money because they are ready for it for the post-crisis era. And this is a period of time whereby I feel that such startups actually have the luxury of looking at the situation and say, all right, what can we do post-pandemic? But I think, by and large, a lot of startups have probably less than 18 months runway. We are already seeing a few so-called unicorns, who are releasing, fairly, negative news about themselves.
Yeah. So Andy, you have a lot of connections in the States, both startups and investors. How many startups actually have the luxury that Bobby mentioned? Do you have the statistics for that? And overall, in terms of sentiment, how are investors thinking about investing during this time?
Yeah, so the new numbers for the current quarter haven't come out yet in terms of the VC financing front, so I can't speak officially to that, but I can tell you a bit about the sentiment on the ground right now. And again, the sentiment is that the VCs have the enough capital in their funds to do whatever it takes in terms of bridge rounds to protect their existing portfolio of investments in a way that we have not seen before. There is a blanket set of bridge rounds being issued right now in convertible notes and additional equity financing that I think is going to step up. I'm still not convinced that the VCs will be able to make new investments in this time. Most of the VCs I speak to say that they intend to continue making new investments. Again, I'm not convinced of that. And again, the key thing here is that there's so much of my own research and personal experience that suggests that personal meeting between the investor and the entrepreneur is so essential to making a deal happen. And if we can't find a way to facilitate that in-person interaction in a way that people feel comfortable and feel safe and want to have those interactions, I'm still skeptical we'll see a lot of new deals converting. I think online platforms can help a lot with helping entrepreneurs and investors find each other, both in the current era as well as in the future when this is all over. I am not convinced that unless we can put them together in person, that we can get like big institutional rounds to convert. Like the question you have to ask yourself is, would you invest $5 million in someone that you've never met in person? And for me personally, I don't think I could feel comfortable doing that. And that's really I think the core challenge of this era.
Actually, Andy, I do have a question for you. I mean, you're a fellow angel investor yourself, right? From briefly what we discussed earlier. Do you think that actually in this period of time, that's where the opportunities lie with angel investors? Because obviously, angel investors require much lesser and much less diligence in terms of looking at a project. and obviously we are able to sort of be sitting where we are and say that, all right, and evaluate, for example, new startups and say that, hey, you know what, this is actually good post pandemic. So do we want to take a bet on that? So what do you think? I mean, in your angel investor
so I think
cycle.
on a general intuitive level, yes, I think the average angel investor would be more predisposed in the current environment than, say, the average VC. Now, just for background, a good portion of my research is looking at the behavior and outcomes of angel investors around the world, but especially in the United States. We've actually run the largest survey ever of angel investors as part of our research. And the one thing that I would say that is a negative about angel investors in this time period is that our research shows that a huge driver of why people angel invest is for entertainment value and just as a way to feel connected with the entrepreneurial community. Now, the problem with that incentive is it directly contradicts with what these investors are seeing in terms of their own personal wealth. It's hard to have fun angel investing if your own personal retirement fund is taking a huge hit with the market. So if you've already lost 20% off your retirement savings, it doesn't feel like, oh, I want to go out and gamble some money on these startups. And so I think those forces are working against each other. On one hand, you're absolutely right that I think angels in a lot of ways better positioned than VCs. On the other side, the VCs have a fixed pool of LP money that they've already got in the bank. And so they don't have to worry about any downturn in that. That just sort of exists. Perhaps it hurts future funds, but at minimum, the fund they have is there. For the angels, their actual pile of LP money is their own bank account, and that's been very, very turbulent in the present day.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And a related question for Andy from Mai from Viet Challenge. Do you think this crisis marks the end of the cash burning era? And will investors still have an appetite and patience for unprofitable but highly scalable companies?
So let me just give the caveat right now that I'll answer yes to that question. The main caveat to the answer I'm about to give is that both, especially in the United States, the Federal Reserve is prepared to do whatever it takes to prop up the economy. And that's still and a lot of other sovereign wealth funds and banks are prepared to do the same. And so that's going to counteract against what I'm going to say, which is that the startups and the VCs will impose more discipline. The argument I have actually is less to do with the behavior of the startups themselves and more to do with the market structure. In a lot of markets, I don't mean geographic, I mean in specific industries. So if you think about food delivery and ride sharing, there's been an intense price competition fueled basically by external venture capital, especially sovereign wealth funds. And we're going to see two things. One is that we're going to see individually the startups realize that they cannot afford to keep burning money themselves and sustain this sort of loss-making ongoing path. We see this especially with ride-sharing globally. But the other side that's going to change is that we are going to see a lot of turbulence in the markets and companies are going to leave the market. And what happens is that when you decrease the amount of firms competing in a market, it exponentially gets less competitive. So when you go from 4 to 3 and 3 to 2, the amount of price competition goes down dramatically. So as we reduce the amount of competitors, I think we're going to see a lot less need to engage in really aggressive price cutting competition. And I think that's the key dimension of efficiency that we'd want to see.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, that rhymes pretty well with what the VCs are doing in the region at this point. So another question from the audience is related to how we are running startups in the region. So a lot of startup founders across ASEAN have plans to expand into Vietnam, given the strong economic fundamentals and thriving startup ecosystem. He's asking, well, with this current situation now, what is the panel's advice to them? Should they stick with the strategy or postpone the timeline? What are some of the signs to look out for? So maybe Boom can answer this, and then Malavika as an entrepreneur, you can talk about how you think about new markets during this time.
Yeah, last week we talked with Duolingo. They want to bring the Duolingo test into Vietnam market, and I think this is the best time for Duolingo to enter Vietnamese market in terms of their business. But for the rest of my startup friend, they are just frozen and doing almost nothing, try to survive until they can wake up or they will die. So it depends a lot on what is your natures of business, what is your industry that you want to train. Mostly right now, uh, cannot do anything except bike and food. And that's it. So they drop down all the business 90%. So I think it's better to wait.
It's better to wait. Is the answer from Boom. How do you think, Malavika?
So what I feel is that in this situation, even if we come out of this situation, people are going to be very careful going forward, because in this pandemic we realized a lot of things, and social distancing, and also like you have to don't have to step out to get things done. So what I'm thinking is, going forward, that is going to be the era of new startups or new entrepreneurship. Anything, everything, you have to get it online. And I can quote that the Amazon Go service, Go Grocery, where they have just walk out grocery plan, where you can just you don't have to go to the the counter and get things billed automatic. It does automatically on your phone, and you can pay on your phone. So those kind of market is going to boom more better than going to the shop and getting things done. So that is what my thought process is, because even though this pandemic goes down, I, like, personally, I'll also be a little bit careful going outside or traveling outside. So I would like my things done on digitally, everything done digitally on my phone. So
So maybe to follow up on
that's
that,
what I feel.
yeah, a question from the audience for you, Malavika. In this crisis, how do you manage your payroll, and do you lay off employees? Have you got the question? Yeah. Yeah, I think we're experiencing a bit of the interruption here.
It was very hard.
Mm.
We are literally very struggling too much to maintain the paychecks. And no, we have not laid off any of our employees. As I mentioned earlier, we have a partnering network and even a sales department. So, and we have crossed, what we are doing is we are, are you able to hear me?
I think she just froze a little bit. Why don't we go to the next question for Andy and then come back to her again?
Yeah, definitely. So a question from Leung Tam. You describe a lot of challenges for startups to approach investors in this period of time. What would you advise them to navigate these challenges?
So my key piece of advice here is you cannot bet on external financing, and you've got to get back to basics for yourself as a startup. And in particular, you just got to focus on two numbers, and only two numbers matter. The first is your monthly or even weekly burn rate, essentially your net cash flow, and the second is your runway, which is essentially your cash in the bank divided by your burn rate. You've got to do whatever it takes to get yourself enough runway to survive. And we're advising the startups we work with to target a minimum of 3 months of runway, ideally 6 months. And given some of the conversations we've had here today, I don't think 12 to 18 months would be unreasonable. And you've got to make sure you have that runway, which basically means you've got to make the big aggressive decisions today in order to cut your burn rate to extend that runway. One of the mistakes we're seeing is a lot of entrepreneurs are taking a wait and see approach to making tough decisions. You've got to act now. If you act now and make the aggressive cost cuts today, that gives you exponential increases in your runway. So you've got to make the tough decisions today and plan from that perspective. And again, I think 6 month runway would be absolutely minimum, but like I think 12, 18 month would be often what you may need to target for. I don't think you can plan for a midterm and long term if you have no short term. You've got to protect that short term first.
Yeah, I think that's the standard practice now. They have an 18-month scenario. Is that what you're doing, Malavika? What's your weekly burn rate and runway? How many weeks do you have left in terms of cash flow? That's a bit of the
Okay, so what we have. So what we did, we took an overdraft from bank to let the business run as possible. More than running of the business, we took an overdraft from bank to keep the paychecks going to the people, to our employees. And as mentioned earlier, like since we have a manufacturing, and so we have cross-trained the people. So most of the sales and almost everyone from the sales and marketing team are doing digital marketing, social marketing, and calling people up, calling our previous customers or prospective new customers. And the manufacturing and the production department people, we have put them into a temporary research and development department, where they are developing new prototypes, new designs. They are just online. They are coming up doing things on paper, like going back to those basic old days where everything was done on paper. And then discussing, we have daily calls where they discuss the ideas. And we are just waiting that since India is in a complete lockdown, we are just waiting for the market to open, and we can work on the new designs and come back to the market with a better perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's great. You're managing your finances at the same time. You're not laying off. That's a pretty good example for business now. It's actually a good time for solidarity and keep a lot of people in circulation. So actually in Hanoi we're having a campaign. It's called 10,000 jobs to combat unemployment. Because as long as you keep the employees under payroll, then they will have extra cash to spend, and then the economy can keep it up. So I think it's important for startups and business alike to navigate this time at the same time as trying to have as many employees still employed as possible. And so I think that answers a bit of the question from the audience earlier. In Vietnam, we're trying to have the government is doing a great job in terms of keeping the pandemic in check. So we have the 4th or 5th day without any new cases, and that is a solid foundation for future recovery. And also is very much it's an open economy that can go for investment, especially for a scheme like Meet Your Match that Bobby is working on. We've seen many startups and investors interacting on the platform. And he's also trying to integrate that, Meet Your Match initiative with the Young Ventures platform. How effective do you think that will be, and how much of the problem of direct interaction will that platform solve for both sides? What do you think, Bobby?
Well, like I said, we are in uncharted territory, right? Yes, we have always been using online for a lot of communication purposes, even before this pandemic struck us. Using Zoom, using whatever channels of communication, but then there's always that interpersonal connection that seems to not go away. And this is a time that we really have to see and work around that. Case in point, all the offline events are gone, at least for the year, I think. So other than just what the startup needs to do, I think at the same time, the VCs also will need, to go through, certain changes in the way they evaluate startups, for investment dollars, right? Money will still be on the table, but then they're going to look at it and say that, do you lend any value in this period of time? Are you still lending value after this period of time? For give an example, they may be a little bit more cautious in travel, kind of related type of sectors, whereas healthcare and online education would or communicative platform would be something that they'll pay more attention to, for example. So I think with this meet your match, that's going to give us a lot of data to see how this whole online matching system is going to work, and hopefully it will be more positive than negative. I think there's still a lot of wait and see going on around, as well as trying to figure out what's the best way forward. Because after all, as what Andy has mentioned, they've got money from the LPs and they're investing money, right? But then they also have to answer to the LPs in on why they're pulling or writing that check for the startups.
Yeah, great initiative, and I truly believe that this is a great initiative in time enough for both sides to participate, and hopefully will solve part of the problem that Andy mentioned about direct interaction. So that links to the next questions about what happens in the future. And Danny Cowger, an audience and an active investor into startup in Via Challenge, has a question about the specific sectors and jurisdictions that you think entrepreneurship will benefit the most in the current crisis, and also as a personal investor, Andy, and other speakers, if you have money set aside right now, what would you invest in personally, and where?
Yeah, so I'll get started on that one. I would say that we've got to make sure you're looking at the exact fundamentals of the business in a generic way. Don't get too isolated in the COVID scenario. Assume that this will end at some point. You've got to make sure the fundamentals are there. And I'll give two examples. I think the first is that, of course, in the current environment, food delivery services have a tremendous amount of potential. We've got to ask in the long term how much of that demand will persist, in that how many people are going to come back to the grocery stores after the crisis is over. And in particular for the food delivery business as an example, there's no going around the numbers in terms of the cost structure. The actual cost of delivering groceries to the home is still quite high. That doesn't change independent of the crisis. And so you've got to know that these numbers can work in the long term. In terms of, like, for example, I'm very excited about online collaboration and the digital technologies that allow work from home. I think we are going to see a pretty substantial shift in companies allowing their employees to work from home, which means that we need more work from home technologies like Slack and Zoom. Here's the part I would caution is that you've got to, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to look forward yourself and have a hypothesis and a theory about which parts of collaboration will persist at home and not go back to the office once this crisis is over. And in particular, there's two things I'll point out. The first is that there's certain kinds of jobs where having in-person employees allows managers to have accountability on their employees. So if you feel like you need to, if there's spaces where it's primarily about the incentives of getting your employees to work really hard, those are kind of things where you may not want to bet on the online collaboration. The other is that there's certain kinds of innovation that depend on in-person interaction. As an example, I'll give you one example of a research project we did. We studied the effect of commuting distance on innovation. And what we show is that for the closer employees live to the office, the more innovative that company is. And the reason is that there's something special about being in the office and having people converse at the water cooler that lets people come up with new ideas. That kind of innovation may not be as possible in the online environment. And so in those two examples, I think those are situations where you don't want to get too bullish about what's possible online, and you want to still bet against necessarily online fully dominating.
Yeah, that's very great sharing. Then the next question comes from an audience. Do you foresee the global supply chain changing, production being done less in China and domestically, and how should startup that previously rely on such sources of supply prepare for that change? Maybe a question for Malavika.
Yeah, so one example I would like to mention is that the government of India has now started an online, like a campaign or something. So, online competition to come up with a good platform, just like Zoom, just but made in India. So what I feel is like, yeah, going forward there would be a change in the market and how people are approaching towards goods, uh, how people would like to have goods being developed in their own country. And but that China is a market which cannot be beaten. And particular me, I have definitely browse and surf, and I even shop a lot of stuffs which is definitely manufactured in China. But more and more countries are now becoming more focused, so that the development, especially Japan, has also come forward and said that, have more, give more opportunity, and have their more manufacturing and development being done in, should be spread across all global and not just focused in China.
Yeah,
So
so
most people would
diversify
be
a little
done
bit, right? Yeah, yeah.
made in
Mm.
their own countries. Yeah.
Yeah, I think both of you made very strong points about how innovation comes from interaction, and you should diversify your supply chain a little bit. That helps you in the long term. And back to the comment from Andy, that sounds something like a classic pitch from a co-working space that we managed before. Sometime when you interact with people, you come up with new ideas, and that's exactly what we're lacking during this time. Um, so a bit more on the future of startups. A particular question from Christine in the VS Challenge team. If my startup is in the middle of the fundraising process, yet it got delayed or put on hold because of the pandemic, what are some steps that I could take to continue the process? Maybe Bobby can have the answer for this.
Um, okay, let me read the question again. What are some steps I could take to continue? So if you're talking about continuing on the process of fundraising, right? So off the top of my head, I see two scenarios. Number one, okay, so I think this got to predicate on the fact that how deep has a startup already been in negotiation. If it's just one of those hi bye, see my deck, or checking things out type of things, then probably the investment prospect wasn't even high to begin with, and so hence during this period of time, and that's when probably investors will not look at startups that they have no particular interest in. But if the VCs actually do have a particular interest in your startup, and I'm talking to Christine here, and if the process has already, let's say, advanced, to a fairly late stage of discussion, a simple, email ping or a call or a chat, notification to your VCs to maybe start the process again. Then again, you got to look at the VCs that you're talking to, whether are they still ready to invest in this period of time. Even though we mentioned that there were some VCs that they are quite bullish still, but in reality, you're going to see a lot of VCs, sort of going back to the drawing board and assess, the opportunity and then the investment thesis. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on how deeply involved you are in terms of your fundraising process. So like I said, if it's deep enough, I think the investors will actually come back to the table again. Yeah.
Yeah, that great sharing. And from the point of view of a VC, I think it's a good time for you to rearrange your financials and do as a diligent, private job as you can, because it's a good time to do that, as all the speakers have mentioned. So we have another question before we sort of enter the last phase of the conversation. It's actually from the Association of Vietnamese Students in San Francisco. What have you learned from your company's crisis management? Do you think your company will be making changes to the protocol post-pandemic? I think this one is for entrepreneurs like Malavika. And Boom, can you share a little bit on this?
Yeah. So what we learned from this crisis is basically that cash is king. Startups generally don't die because they don't have ideas. They die because they run out of cash. So what we have to do is that we have to have a plan to conserve that cash and be aggressive to make that plan in such a way that you have at least 12 months of cash in hand, or at least some financial plan in hand, that in this crisis that you are able to, in future, in this kind of crisis comes, you are able to run your paychecks, you're able to even if your manufacturing is at a standstill, you can have your pay the rent of your factory or anywhere place you are, and run the deliveries, everything. So this is the main thing that I have learned. And also the cross training of people, like how you have to manage your staff so that they can even contribute in this crisis, where they can work from home or do some things of stuff but still give provide some good input to your company. So,
Yeah, in my company, we have the schedule for meeting to discuss about what is the new normal after the pandemic. But what we have learned during last time is agree cash is king. So we think that we have a very good team because all of my teammates and uh, they uh, they sent a letter and said, okay, I want to cut down my salary and everything because I want to keep our runway longer. And it's funny because in Vietnam we have the term uh, lose face. So some of my friend, they cannot talk to the employees about the employers about they want to cut their salary. So we have to play the movie up in the air, like Boom come to the company and talk with all the staff and discuss about cutting their salary. It's also quite good to renegotiation about rent, about everything. And I think that we review and we saving a lot during this time. And last but not least, this is the time we have time to review again and again our strategy and to upskill and reskill for our staff. So I think for the small and flexible company, this time is quite good for us.
So
Yeah, thank
I'd
you.
like to add in one point to what Malavika said earlier. Is that in terms of startups that basically cash is king, as you mentioned, right? And then this is something that I find kind of funny. There's a lot of interruption. If hang on a second. Yeah. Okay. So okay, here's the thing, right? I'll give you two examples. For example, like startups, as what Malavika has said, cash is king. We think about the runway, so on and so forth. The other example I want to give is this friend of mine that run a really small business in Ho Chi Minh City. He has a chicken rice store, right? And sure, his shop had to close, and he could only do delivery, and so it was actually facing near closure that he came up with a lot of different ideas to sell, whether at a discount, whether in bulk, or different things. So if you look at startups, right, and this is something because probably I'm from the older generation, regardless of what I always tell my startups, okay, look at yourself as a business. If you see yourself as a business, you will survive, you try and survive, as much as you can. Whereas I think the whole startup mentality that is being built is that everything is all about cash, everything is all about the runway, and that's I guess is fuel from this whole investor FOMO thing, whereby you need to build growth and do scaling, right? So I think this is a good period of time that startups look at it and say, all right, what kind of business am I building? Right? Am I building a business or am I building a startup? So if you're building a startup today, you probably it's not going to work, right? But if you're building a business, what is a relevant business model that you need to have to survive as a business?
Yeah, so cash flow and business model. These are the really practical advice for startups. So my last two questions will go for all the speakers. Two questions actually. First one, we are really much consumed by this current pandemic and how to survive in the short term. But strategically, what would you think about the most developed or the most promising sectors or types of business that will thrive in the next 3 to 5 years? Just make a prediction because you are all experts in the field. And the second thing is, what would you advise, startups and entrepreneurs alike during this time, beside the thing that you just said? So, any prediction, Andy? We'll start with you the most.
I'm going to hold stable on what my predictions were ex ante to the crisis. So I think that there's still a tremendous amount of direct applications of emergent technologies in the enterprise space. I think those will, if anything, increase in value. So I'm thinking about things like specific applications of AI to particular verticals, different kinds of matching technologies, or augmented reality, as well as blockchain technologies, as well as different kinds of public and private cloud implementations. I think those will continue to be valuable. If you look at the returns in the market today, the reality is actually the very largest technology companies today are actually doing well. Like they're actually holding the overall like U.S. stock market like actually pretty high, like in a relative sense. And the reason is that, again, the technologies they provide are still absolutely essential. So what does it mean though for entrepreneurs that those big companies are doing well? What that means, though, is that if you're an entrepreneur that, say, provides like a particular tool for cloud computing, let's say, that means that you've got a set of potential acquirers in the future, like I'm thinking Amazon and like Microsoft and Google, that still are actually doing very well and still have a lot of cash. And so if you can build for acquisition in these spaces, I think you're still doing very, very strong. I think the fundamentals there are still strong. And otherwise, though, again, like I think the direct-to-consumer set of possibilities is still, I think if anything, that's been accelerated forward because of the change in consumer behavior. Like as an example of that, if we talked earlier in our conversation about online education has always, the value proposition is the same as it was before. The difference is that consumers weren't as like amenable to it before, but now that we've just forced everyone to try it out, and it turns out in many cases it works out pretty well, and we're seeing that shift in behavior. But otherwise, though, my bet is still on vertical applications of emergent technologies for enterprise applications.
Yeah, so that being AI, VR, blockchain, and other technologies, right? Yeah, I wish we have more time to elaborate all these technologies.
We'll have to do another podcast.
Yeah, it's gonna be a 3-hour thing. Thank you, Andy. And then, what do you think, Bobby?
Yeah, I'll stick to education and healthcare, which I've been paying a lot of attention to in any case, pre-pandemic, especially in the context of Vietnam. I'm seeing this great growth in terms of the economy, and being a so-called a Confucianism fundamental country. Education is obviously the topmost minds of parents. So education in terms of skills learning, yes, and healthcare in particular. So these two will still be quite active. I think if you talk about communications and all that stuff, I think it's hot. It's going to be hot now. I don't know if post-pandemic is still going to be hot still, unless you have a lot of value added to it, other than just being able to do online calls. Higher technology, I totally agree with Andy. This is a time where we actually want to see how we are able to leverage of technology in order to build efficiency, and on top of that, to sort of create that layer of insurance, just in case something like this were to happen in the near future.
Thank you, Bobby. really specific prediction about the education and healthcare industries. Would you share with us, Malavika, on your
Yeah,
view?
I actually can take something from Bobby and Andy both. Like I feel like digital market and the healthcare industry are going to boom, and even though our manufacturing is totally based on ground, like we have people developing a product, a vehicle, but still we have come up with an online store, and it is India's first store where you can buy your vehicle for the physically challenged and all the physically challenged aids and like wheelchairs, hearing aids, everything online. And we will deliver it to your doorstep with a detailed list of how you are going to fix that attachment to your to your vehicle, and you can just start uh, gaining mobility. So digital is the way to go, and the healthcare industry as well. After this pandemic, people will generally focus more on getting their better insurances and taking care of the health more. So those two industries are definitely going to boom. And one more thing to add is work from home options. Imagine how much money would be saved into set up an infrastructure, a physical infrastructure where a lot of people sit, the network and everything. And I don't think so the productivity has gone less with the remote work from home options. But definitely people, especially small companies, can save more if they choose remote options.
Thank you, Malavika. So, bet on digital market and healthcare industry. How about you, Boom?
I agree with Bobby in terms of education tech still the best, especially in Vietnam. Uh, from my point of view, anything like we build a business, not a startup, that means you need a meaningful innovation will work in the near future. But a little bit different is I think in Vietnam right now is the best time for fintech because of the the pandemic. So we change the behavior as Professor Andy said. The cashless economy in Vietnam is like a huge story, but okay, because of the pandemic, so people scared of using cash, so they start to use e-wallet and transfer the money via bank. And because of the pandemic, so the state bank agree to try IKVC. That means so we can don't no need to go to the bank to open a bank account anymore. So you can do everything online. So I think fintech in Vietnam have a huge opportunity because of it this time.
Thank you, Boom. So, education and fintech. We have a nice list here from verticals applying AI, VR, and blockchain to education, healthcare, digital markets, and fintech. These are really interesting verticals or areas of entrepreneurship that we should look into. And I think they existed before this pandemic, and if anything, this pandemic speed things up a little bit more. So thank you for your prediction. And from our side, as the organizers of Via Challenge and Zong Ventures, we encourage all these startups to think harder about the future. Do all your cost cutting or manage your financials as needed. Also think about the future and be optimistic. Think about applying for Via Challenge if you are pre-seed to Series A, or if you are a little bit bigger with an established startup or enterprise, you can list your pitch decks or your information on Zong Ventures. That will help you to connect with all the investors in Southeast Asia and in the US. And with that being said, the webinar today has been a little bit like 20 minutes longer than expected. I would like to thank all the speakers for their valuable time. Thank you, Andy, Malavika, Boomchen, and Bobby for
Thank
joining.
you. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Great
Okay.
stuff.
I
Yeah.
hope to talk to you more in the future for our future webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Bye.
also thanks to all the audience for staying with us. Stay safe and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.